I think overthinking, quote unquote, overthinking is a huge thing.
It can feel hard to have a hard emotion or thought, but then also feel confused and lost about what to do about it. And so just feeling more confident of, okay, I'm feeling this really hard thing, but I have some clarity about how I can move forward.
And I think it's such a skill to be able to sort of like accept that and also see maybe some some benefits of it too.
And so I think relating to your thoughts and your emotions in this way is going to help, right? You make decisions, just take actions that are ultimately going to contribute to you getting your needs met and to living in a way that's really consistent with your values.
Alison and Audrey, it's lovely to have you on the show today. How are you doing this morning?
Doing great.
Doing great. Yeah, went for a little walk with the dogs this morning, so feeling good.
Wonderful. So I'm just going to ask you the question I like to ask all of my guests at the beginning of each of these interviews. And that is, if you had one of your favorite well-being boosting strategies that you could share with our guests or our viewers, what would it be and why?
I can go first. Yeah, I think just jumping off of what I just said, I think for me, it's definitely taking a walk. It always clears my mind and helps me feel better. And I really like it because it's kind of a combination of a lot of different wellness interventions, right? It's exercise, it's nature, it's time with my cute dogs, it's maybe time with my partner or a friend or calling my family. So that's something that is really foundational to my wellness routine.
I love that. And vitamin D from the sun and
Yes.
all sorts of good benefits. Alison, do you have another one?
I do, yeah. I think it probably would have been good for us to talk about this ahead of time, but I wasn't sure if you're going to mention the fact that this is actually the second time we're recording.
So I'm asking you the same question.
But I really do think that for me, like I've been reflecting on this, like this answer is a little different from the last time, but I would say cognitive flexibility, adapting to new situations, shifting your perspective when faced with challenges, really handling like unexpected things that come your way. So yeah, like we had this idea that recording it once we'd be done, and here we are again. And I think it's such a skill to be able to sort of like accept that and also see maybe some some benefits of it too. Like Audrey and we just started doing podcasts with people, and I think any practice we can get is really great. There was also maybe an answer from the last podcast that I felt like I could have said it in a better way, and here's my second chance. So I really do believe cognitive flexibility is a great skill to have. And I'm just also thinking about like the world we live in today and how so many unexpected things can come our way. And so if we can kind of figure out a way to adapt and not stay rigid in how we think it should go or what we think should happen, that can be really powerful.
That's awesome, actually. Like you combined a bunch of different things: adaptability, which, like you said, is key, and then cognitive reappraisal, just being like, oh, there's a benefit in this situation that was like a little stressful, maybe.
Exactly.
Well, I'd really love to learn more about you. Today, we're going to be mostly talking about your book, Decompile Your Mind, An Engineer's Guide to Thoughts and Emotions. But first, I'd love to know about you and kind of what led you to write this book.
Yeah, so I've been working at university for about 4 years now. I have a really long background in community mental health in so many different types of settings. So but somehow I found my way to higher ed, and I truly love it. I didn't know that working with engineers was ever going to be a niche that I would find. I didn't know that was a thing. But now that I'm here, um, I've definitely noticed like a lot of different trends among engineers, like the kinds of challenges they face, and maybe some approaches that work well for them. Meanwhile, Audrey, who also she's my colleague as well as a co-author, but we started talking together about the different trends we were noticing, and we realized there was just so much overlap, which we found really interesting. So as we were providing therapy for engineers, we started to really put all these ideas together and really just kind of brainstorm like how is our approach going to help engineers specifically. And yeah, I don't know if Audrey, you want to speak more to that piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think my journey into falling into where I'm at is so much happenstance, right? It was like I was an undergrad, kind of realizing that I wanted to do psychology, wanting to realize I like counseling, and then kind of realizing, oh, counseling in a higher ed setting is kind of a thing, right? And then from there, realizing, oh, counseling embedded within an engineering school is a skill or is an opportunity. And so kind of developing this specialty over time of just kind of happenstance and falling into what was interesting to me and what felt good and aligned with my values. Um, and and I think for me, working with engineering students is so powerful because they're a really motivated group of people, typically, right? They're really logical and really bright, and they're also really skeptical. And to me, I appreciate that challenge, right? Because a lot of times I'll say something, right, like a psychological concept or skill, and they'll challenge me, and I'll be like, oh, whoa. I assume this to be true, but let me think about why it feels true to me. And does it feel true? And if so, how can I articulate that? And so working with this population has really given me some opportunities to refine what I'm thinking, but also really clarify like why these psychological concepts make sense and how to almost translate it to a population of people who are trained to work, and see the world kind of in a pretty different way than us as therapists.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic transition into talking a bit about your book, which is targeted towards engineers, and you even use some coding language in the book to help them better understand psychological concepts. So could you go into how you do that a little bit more, maybe give an overview of the book and help our viewers understand a bit more about what you are offering?
Yeah, sounds good. So I'll start with maybe just explaining the title a little bit. It's called Decompile Your Mind, An Engineer's Guide to Thoughts and Emotions. And so the title is inspired by a concept in software engineering. Um, the idea is that, with computers day to day, they're very user friendly. We can easily interact with them. They help us complete tasks all the time. Honestly, we're just, yeah, we can use it without even thinking about it. But underneath that more like user friendly exterior is a language called machine code, and that language is made up of ones and zeros. So it's a lot different than the what we interact with day to day, and it's actually quite raw and literal, and really we can't make a lot of meaning out of those ones and zeros. We really do need those more intermediate languages to get there. We find that this is often the case with distressing thoughts and emotions, that in their raw and literal form we only get some of the picture of what's going on. And so a software engineer, when wanting to learn more about a computer program, they might use a tool called a decompiler, changing the ones and zeros and translating them into a more intermediate language like Java or C++. Um, those intermediate languages are still like really technical. You still kind of need to know what you're doing. I can't just start using C++ and know what I'm doing. Like you need some training in that area. But once you sort of get familiar with that computer language, you can really explore the computer program more, find out what its limitations are and how it can better interface with other programs. And so with our book, the idea is that we've created these emotion and thought decompilers, and the reader can use them to sort of translate the raw data going on in their brain, these distressing thoughts and emotions, into a language that feels more accessible to them. Just really building a lot of insight into what's going on.
Yeah, and I think, the decompilers are models that Allison and I created, but within the decompilers, they are, informed by evidence-based approaches, right? So like self-compassion, mindfulness, there's a ton of research behind those concepts, and kind of contextualizing it in a framework and in a structure to help readers really understand how to implement those skills in a way that is cohesive with one another. And then ultimately the goal is to help people feel more confident, have more clarity in how to handle those distressing emotions and thoughts in a way that helps them, more effectively meet their psychological needs, move towards their values. I think a lot of times engineers particularly, right, they are trained to be really good problem solvers, right? And so they come to therapy thinking about, okay, how do I solve the problem of my mind? How do I solve the problem of this emotion, right? How do I get rid of it? And we're really trying to reframe that to say, the goal is not really to solve your emotion, right? It's not just to not feel sad, because actually when we do that, that actually exacerbates the symptoms and typically makes things worse. And so how to relate to that sadness differently so you experience it, kind of gather the data that emotion is trying to tell you, and then solve the problem of the underlying need and value that kind of is kind of indicated by that emotion.
Yeah. I love that. Go ahead.
One thing I want to add there, there's a reason we didn't call the book like Debug Your Brain. That's because there's nothing wrong with your brain when you have a distressing thought or emotion. That your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, to protect you and try to help you survive a situation. A lot of times, these distressing thoughts and emotions pop up as motivators for that, and we can speak more to that if you want us to. But your brain is operating just how it's supposed to. So it's really more of a matter of, how do I work with my brain?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I love that you're calling these exercises or strategies or tools decompilers, because you're using the language that engineers understand to teach them, ways to not debug their minds, but to work with it. So can you give me an example or two of some of your decompilers?
Sure. I can start with maybe the emotion decompiler. So it is a 7-step process, right? And we recognize that, they're not necessarily going to go through it every single time they have an emotion, but when they're wanting to kind of take a step back and really process and reflect on the emotion. And so the first step is to, one, just kind of consider the context that they're in, right? So kind of saying, maybe I'm at a work meeting, and I wouldn't feel like this would not be a socially appropriate space to outwardly experience and process my emotion. And so really respecting that context and saying, okay, that might not be the context that is appropriate, but I recognize I do need a space to process this. So let me be intentional that tonight when I go home and I sit in my comfy chair, that's going to be kind of the space where I process the emotion. And then the next step is to kind of really mindfully experience the emotion, right? We talk about riding the wave of the emotion. How do you sit with the emotion, experience the sensations of the emotion? And I think a lot of times, our clients don't necessarily know what that means, right? They are like, oh, what does actually feeling my emotion mean? What is the way, how do you ride the emotion, the wave of the emotion, without exacerbating it? And so really kind of the book describes what that process actually is. And then we kind of help them bring some language to the emotion, because, right, you might recognize you feel something distressing, but you don't know what the word to describe the emotion is. So bringing in that language. And then we kind of talk about primary and secondary emotions. So primary emotions are the emotions that are really paired with the circumstances that are happening around you, right? So I might feel sad if I broke up with someone, right? Or a friendship ended, right? That's a really like appropriate emotion for that circumstance. But then based on my beliefs about that emotion, I might have a secondary emotional reaction to that first emotion. So maybe I don't think sadness is okay. And so then I feel anger about having to feel sad, right? So then in that situation, anger would be a secondary emotion. And then you kind of discern, okay, is the emotion that I'm feeling, is it a primary emotion or a secondary emotion? If it's a primary emotion, then we want to really kind of examine what the function of that is. If it's a secondary emotion, we recognize the function of that emotion is a protective mechanism, because it kind of is trying to protect you from the emotion itself. And so we kind of go back to the process to try to feel the primary emotion. And then once you identify the primary emotion, you kind of work your way to really identify what are the needs and values that are underneath that primary emotion, right? So maybe sadness is an indicator like, hey, I really value connection, right? Or I am needing support, right? And so then you go into that problem solving zone of, okay, maybe I can't necessarily fix the initial sadness that I was feeling, but how can I use my problem solving skills to better get my connection needs met, seek support. So that's an example of one of the decompilers.
Love it. Alison, do you have a second example you want to share?
Yeah, of course. So the emotion decompiler is a little more linear than the thought decompiler. And when I say linear, I just want to be careful there. Like, I think any of the elements Audrey just described can be really useful and helpful, even if you don't go through the entire thing. The thought decompiler is actually more of a flow chart. So I'll do my best to explain it here, but it really is best if you can also have the visual in front of you as well. So when we have a distressing thought, the first thing that you want to do is figure out, is this thought coming from a place that's more internal, like the assumptions I'm making about what's going on, or is it external? No, like, we can all agree this is exactly what happened. So an example of that would be you meet up with some friends, and then afterwards you think to yourself, oh my gosh, they were totally judging me. If that thought is external, you'd have maybe some more concrete evidence for it. Maybe one of your friends said, wow, I'm really judging you. Or, they might say some things in a maybe less direct way, but you'd have more information. Maybe another friend said, yeah, it really did feel like they were judging you. So if that distressing thought is external, what you do from there is really figure out, like, is this something that that I need to take any action on? Is this a changeable thing? Like, can I kind of repair with these friends? Or does it feel like more of like, there's nothing I can do about the fact that they judge me about that. And I don't think like I need to like try to repair. So if you want to do something, like, use your problem solving skills. But if there's nothing to do, you kind of use more of, and these are a lot of skills that we explain in the book, but more like mindfulness and cognitive diffusion, where you sort of let the thought come and go. You don't let it really influence your behavior. You sort of find some acceptance in that you had the thought, but that the thought doesn't necessarily indicate, what's going to happen in the future. If you decide that, okay, like, no, I think I'm just like feeling socially anxious, I don't know, I don't think they actually were judging me, then the thought is more internal, and you do the same skills I just described. Mindfulness, cognitive diffusion, self-compassion is another piece of that. There's a third category here, and that is being unsure. Is this thought like coming just from me and like maybe my anxiety? Is this thought real, like, or does this thought represent what's real? If you're unsure about that, that's when you bring in more of the Socratic questioning. Some people might be familiar with CBT. When you use Socratic questioning, what you're doing is you're trying to get to the bottom of it. And this is where engineers tend to thrive, figuring out like, what's the evidence for this thought? Is this, what are my biases here? And once you can kind of figure that out, then you can go back to the other parts of that flow chart. So again, I encourage any listener who's interested in this to go check out the actual visual, and we'll talk about how to do that later.
Yeah, what I really like about the thought decompiler is it's a way to help engineers discern when do they use that like engineering problem solving skill set, and when do they need a different skill set that would be more effective, right? So I think the example we use in the book is, okay, I have a thought, oh, the pipe is broken, right? That's an example of an external thought, because you can kind of have evidence that, hey, it's dripping. When I turn on the sink, it's not working. So you can kind of use your problem solving to fix that leaky pipe. But if the thought is, oh, I'm such a loser, right? And recognizing that that's kind of an internal pattern, there's not necessarily evidence that we can really be firm or objective about, then we want to take a different skill set, because if we're applying that engineering problem skill set to that type of thought, it really can exacerbate the distress that comes with a thought like that. And so the big piece with the thought decompiler is discernment of how do I know when to use what set of skills.
Yeah, I like that you've set that up as basically a decision tree, or like if-then statements, which is code, I believe. I'm not a coder either. So if people are using these decompilers, what do you think some of the challenges are that they may encounter? I mean, we all encounter challenges on our mental health journey. So based on your coaching, you probably have been able to notice some of the challenges that people face.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think our goal with both of these models is that we want to give some structure and framework to these concepts that are really messy and abstract. And at the same time, these are really messy and abstract skills and concepts. And so while in this really brief conversation we're having, we're describing it in a way that's pretty straightforward, there's a ton of nuance, right, at each level. And it's very kind of situation dependent. And we go into some of that nuance more in the book. And I think it takes time to get to know yourself, to kind of know how to handle that nuance for you and what you want that mindfulness to look like, or that step of like self-compassion to look like, things like that.
Yeah. And something I'll add is that what we're asking readers to do can be quite uncomfortable as well, especially if, the reader is used to approaching their thoughts and emotions in a very particular way. And also if they're not really used to approaching them at all. And so I think one challenge someone might have reading the book is just kind of figuring out like the right amount of discomfort that is actually going to be like helpful to them versus, okay, am I actually dysregulated though trying these skills? We do, talk about the window of tolerance where you're in that middle state. You have the right amount of arousal. You can feel some distress, but still learn and grow and be creative and think. And outside of that window, you might be super anxious and overwhelmed, and hyper aroused, or on the other hand, you might be feeling more numb and distant and disengaged. And in either hypo or hyper arousal, you're not going to get those benefits from learning something new. And so yeah, it can be kind of a challenge, and it can take some practice to kind of learn when are these skills gonna serve me to practice them, and when do I just need to focus on like getting back to that window of tolerance.
Yeah, that's the window of tolerance is really an interesting topic to apply to all of this. So how might one determine when they're overly activated, perhaps overly stressed, overly, grieving, or basically like outside of that ability to execute these strategies?
Yeah, well, I can start answering that. So in the book, we have kind of indicators that suggest you might be either within your window of tolerance or above or below your window of tolerance. And so just trying to make it really concrete, of really concrete examples, right? So an example that you might be outside of your window of tolerance is like your heart's racing, right? Your palms are sweaty. You are feeling really irritable and tense, right? You're like feeling an urge to like fight. That might be an indicator that you're hyper aroused in that moment, or maybe kind of that like, oh, I'm really having a hard time staying present. I feel kind of out of my body, right? That also can be a more concrete indicator that you're hypo aroused. And it's hard, right? We don't have like a simple answer because each person is slightly different in how they experience the different states. And so we encourage people to kind of read that chart that we have in the book and we'll read through some of the examples we have and then reflect for yourself of like, oh yeah, I remember a time when I was like in that state, or, oh yeah, I remember a time that I was in this state.
Yeah, I think another thing to note is like, I guess a lot of our clients tend to be on the more logical side and typically pick up on changes in their thinking versus maybe their feeling or what's going on in their body, like physically. And so I think someone who is more logical might notice like racing thoughts when they're hyper aroused, and or like thoughts that just sort of ruminate and don't go anywhere, and just kind of get stuck in this pattern versus maybe the absence of thoughts for hypoarousal, and just sort of like kind of just totally detaching from what's going on. But I agree with Audrey. It's very just a personal thing for everybody.
Yeah, in my own experience, you guys just reminded me. I recently noticed that when my thoughts start to race, it feels like kind of hot in my chest. And so I'm labeling this the hot thought when I'm like really excited or nervous, or they're basically the same thing in my body. They're just sort of this like hot sensation. Is that something that you guys talk about, or am I just crazy?
No, that sounds spot on. I can absolutely, and I can also like on a personal level agree with that. Like while the racing thoughts happen, the body is sort of like gearing up for something, right? And so those can definitely go hand in hand.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to just watch it in real time. And I imagine, like, even in my own experience, I know this is a skill that takes time to learn. And so, your clients may be people who are better at observing their thoughts. I'm probably a person who's better at observing my emotions. So I was like, whoa, this thought thing is actually like interrelated with my emotions. How bizarre.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think we have one tool that we offer in the book is this model to help people identify their emotions. And for some people, the way that they can identify their emotions is by noticing their physiological sensations. That's a little bit more accessible for them. Whereas other people, maybe they're more aware of their thoughts. And so noticing their thoughts is their entry point into identifying their emotions.
So if people build these skills, or like start to build these skills, because I know it takes time, what are some of the benefits they might experience in their lives?
I mean, I think for me, right, it's like having a little bit more clarity and confidence for how to respond to really distressing experiences, right? It can feel hard to have a hard emotion or thought, but then also feel confused and lost about what to do about it. And so just feeling more confident of, okay, I'm feeling this really hard thing, but I have some clarity about how I can move forward. I also think, right, it's ultimately, how do we help people better meet their underlying needs and move towards their values and the things that they really care about? And so I think relating to your thoughts and your emotions in this way is going to help, right? You make decisions, just take actions that are ultimately going to contribute to you getting your needs met and to living in a way that's really consistent with your values.
Yeah, and I'll get a little more specific here, just speaking to either the engineer or the analytical person. I think overthinking, quote unquote, overthinking is a huge thing in this population. Thinking is what they tend to do best, and they're really good at picking things apart and making decisions that are super informed. And I've heard from a lot of my clients that it gets to a point where it's really hard to quote unquote turn that off. And so it's tempting to sort of avoid and either work extra or to use some other kind of distraction like scrolling through their phone to like not have to think. And so I will say I think our book can really help with that. It can actually help you have a healthier relationship with your thoughts and emotions, that you don't have to sort of feel the urge to run away from it, and you don't have to necessarily engage in it, and kind of find a cool middle ground there.
I love that. That seems like a fantastic way to kind of wrap up this conversation. So if people want to learn more about you and your book and your work, where can they go to find you?
Yeah, our book is currently on Amazon. We are working on getting it into other places. If you're in Colorado, you can buy it directly from us if you'd like to do that, even at a discount. Our website is appliedwellnessinitiatives.com, and you can find us at that name on LinkedIn as well. And then we did recently get an Instagram. When we first recorded this podcast a couple of weeks ago, we had 10 followers. Now we have a whole 47 followers. So we would love to see that number continue to increase there.
Yeah. And I think just to remind folks of our book title, right? So it's Decompile Your Mind, an Engineer's Guide to Thoughts and Emotions.
And I understand you guys are offering one free copy of your book to a lucky viewer of this podcast. And so I will put the link to where people can submit their name to be in the drawing for that book in the description below. Awesome. And do you guys have anything else you want to share before I let you go?
I don't think so. Yeah.
I just really appreciate the chance to join you. And then I don't know, I guess one thing I might add is this book is meant for engineers, but also there's a lot of other people, we've gotten some feedback so far since we've published, and that this book is also helpful for non-engineers. So if you're not an engineer yourself, but you maybe are kind of a logical thinker, I think this book can be really helpful for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, I will add that I've read like hundreds of self-help books. People send me their self-help books all the time to review on my website, and your guys' book is actually one of my favorites. I think it's really clear. Yeah, it's really clear. Like, not a lot of writers, can talk about this stuff in a way that, is easy to absorb, because it is nuanced and messy. So I'm really lucky to have the chance to talk to you, and I strongly recommend people check out your book if they're interested.
Great, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.